wake from the speedboat hit my small aluminum fishing boat like a battering ram, sending a freezing wave of water crashing over the side, soaking me to the bone. The boat was a monster, a 300-horsepower wakeboarding machine, and it was being driven by two men with the kind of cruel, vacant faces that I had spent 30 years of my life putting behind bars. They were circling me, closer and closer, their engine a deafening, angry roar, their wake a churning, chaotic whirlpool that was threatening to swamp and capsize my little vessel. On the shore, 100 yards away, on the pristine, manicured lawn of her multi-million-dollar lakefront mansion, stood Brenda, the president of the Kingfisher Estates Homeowners Association. She was watching, her arms crossed, a look of smug, satisfied triumph on her face. This was her doing. This was her solution. I grabbed the small waterproof marine radio I had clipped to my vest. I wasn't panicked. My heart was a cold, steady, and very, very angry drum. My training, 3 decades of it, took over. I keyed the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Warden Franklin, retired," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the roar of their engine. "I have a 10 to 73 in progress. Boating harassment, reckless endangerment. My location is Kingfisher Lake. Coordinates are on my transponder. Vessel is a blue and white speedboat. Registration?" I read the numbers off their stern. 2 male subjects on board, hostile. I am recording the entire incident. Request immediate assistance. The 2 thugs in the boat just laughed. They thought I was calling for help. They had no idea I was calling in an airstrike. And then, from over the horizon, from the main channel of the lake, a new sound began to grow. A deep, powerful, and very angry roar. A boat that was faster, bigger, and infinitely more menacing than theirs. A state fish and wildlife enforcement boat, its blue and red lights now flashing, was coming at them at full throttle. At the helm was a man I knew very well, a man I had trained myself. My old partner, Senior Game Warden Miller, and he did not look happy. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that beautiful, glorious collision of petty tyranny and real state-sanctioned authority, you have to understand my life. And you have to understand my lake. My name is Sam Franklin, and for 30 years I was a state game warden. I was the law in the wild places. My world was one of poachers, of polluters, of the quiet, patient, and often dangerous work of protecting our state's natural resources from the greed and stupidity of mankind. It was more than a job. It was a calling. When I retired, I came home. Home to the small, modest house on the shores of Kingfisher Lake, where I had grown up. The property had been in my family for a century. It was an in-holding, a beautiful 50-acre slice of authentic natural shoreline and forest, completely surrounded by a new, obscenely wealthy, and aggressively artificial development called Kingfisher Estates in the heart of my property. The legacy my grandfather had left me, the thing I had spent my life's savings to protect and preserve, was the lake itself. Not just a piece of it, all of it. The whole, beautiful 150-acre body of water and the land beneath it. The deed was ancient, ironclad, and filed away in a fireproof safe in my study. The lake was mine. My dream in retirement was a simple one: to turn my lake into a perfect private wildlife sanctuary. A place for the nesting loons, the migrating geese, the trophy-sized bass I had spent years stocking and managing. It was my own personal conservation project. The problem was that the residents of Kingfisher Estates and their new tyrannical HOA president, Brenda, did not share my conservationist ethics. Brenda was a woman who saw the lake not as a delicate ecosystem to be protected, but as a private, watery playground for her and her wealthy friends, a place to race their speedboats and their jet skis, a backdrop for their lavish parties. Our first interaction was a week after I moved back permanently. She showed up at my door, not with a welcome basket, but with a complaint. "Mr. Franklin," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension, I am Brenda, the president of the Kingfisher Estates HOA. We, the board, are very concerned about the nuisance population of geese on the lake. They are leaving droppings all over our residents' pristine lawns. What are you, as the lake's caretaker, going to do about it? I just stared at her. Ma'am, I'd said, my old warden's patience already wearing thin. Those are Canadian geese. They are a federally protected migratory species, and this is their natural habitat. I am going to do nothing about them, and I'm not the caretaker. I'm the owner. The look on her face was a mixture of confusion and pure unadulterated offense. She didn't believe me about the ownership, and she clearly saw my defense of the geese as a direct act of insubordination. The war had begun. The first major battle was over the wake. The residents of her community treated my lake like their personal racetrack. They would roar past my quiet shoreline in their massive 300-horsepower speedboats, their jet skis screaming like angry hornets, creating huge, destructive wakes that were eroding my shoreline and swamping the nests of the nesting loons I had worked so hard to protect. I tried to be a good neighbor. I went to one of their HOA meetings. I stood before the board and I politely, and with a great deal of scientific detail, explained the ecological damage their boat wakes were causing. I suggested, for the health of the lake that we all enjoyed, that they agreed to a voluntary 100-foot no-wake zone near these show arenas. Brenda publicly laughed at me. "This is a recreational lake, sir, not your private science experiment," she'd said, to the snickering approval of her board. "Our residents have a right to enjoy their expensive watercraft. We will not be creating any restrictive zones. This is not a communist country." So I took matters into my own hands. I used my own boat to install a series of official, legally appropriate, and very visible nitrogen wake zone, sensitive wildlife habitat private property buoys, marking off a 100-foot buffer from my own shoreline. A day later, I found them cut from their anchors and washed up on my beach, a clear, silent, and deeply infuriating act of vandalism. The harassment escalated. Brenda was determined to get me, the quiet, stubborn old man who dared to challenge her off the lake entirely. She had the HOA's lawyer send me a letter, a masterpiece of legal fiction. It claimed that my constant fishing activities, my unauthorized buoys, and my general, unkempt presence on the water was a public nuisance and was a violation of the HOA's completely non-existent authority over the lake. They started sending me fraudulent fines in the mail. A $500 fine for improper buoy placement, a $1,000 fine for interfering with members' recreational activities. My inner monologue was a raging storm. This was a direct assault on my property rights, on my life's passion, and on the very laws I had spent my career enforcing. I installed a new, state-of-the-art, solar-powered security camera system, the powerful, long-range zoom lens, on a tall, disguised pole overlooking the lake. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them a war. And I was going to have the evidence to win it. I didn't have to wait long. A few nights later, my cameras caught them. The footage was crystal clear, a beautiful, damning record of their crime. It showed two men I recognized from Brenda's inner circle, in a speedboat in the middle of the night. It showed them deliberately and repeatedly driving their boat at high speed, directly at my shoreline. A practice known as wake rolling, a tactic used by shoreline property vandals. And the footage clearly showed them taking a longboat hook and cutting the anchor lines to my new replacement buoys. I now had irrefutable proof of a criminal conspiracy to commit vandalism and destruction of property, but before I could even take my evidence to the authorities, Brenda made her final, most dangerous, and most gloriously stupid move. She was tired of the petty games. She decided it was time to escalate from vandalism to direct physical intimidation. She hired two local thugs, a pair of known bullies with more muscle than sense, to confront me on the water, to scare the old man off the lake for good. And that brings us back to that moment. Me in my small, 16-foot aluminum fishing boat, the Loon Spirit, and them in their 300-horsepower monster. A boat that was less a recreational vehicle and more a floating instrument of intimidation. They had buzzed me. They had wake-rolled me. And now they were doing the whirlpool of death, circling me. Closer and closer, their wake a churning, chaotic maelstrom that was threatening to tear my little boat apart and send me into the cold, deep water. It had crossed the line from harassment to a direct, credible threat on my life. But as I was making that calm, professional call to my old apartment on the marine radio, as the thugs in the speedboat were laughing, whooping, and yelling threats at me, they had no idea what they were in the middle of. They thought they were in the middle of a private lake, terrorizing a helpless old man. But they were, in fact, in the middle of a perfectly executed and beautifully documented sting operation. The arrival of the State Fish and Wildlife Enforcement boat was a thing of beauty. It came out of the main channel like a predator, its powerful engines roaring, its blue and red lights flashing, a vision of pure, unadulterated, and very real authority. My old partner, Senior Game Warden Miller, a man who had a legendary and well-earned reputation for being as tough as a $2 steak, brought his big, heavy enforcement vessel alongside their speedboat with a skill that made their own driving look like a child's clumsy play. He and his young, very large partner were on their deck in a flash. The two thugs, who had been so brave and so tough just 30 seconds earlier, now looked like two terrified cornered rats. The sight of the uniforms, the badges, the holstered sidearms, and the cold, hard, unimpressed look in Warden Miller's eyes had completely and utterly broken them. And Miller, my old friend, was a consummate professional. He didn't just arrest them for the harassment. He conducted a full top-to-bottom, by-the-book vessel inspection, and it was a gold mine of violations. Well, I heard him say, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Let's see what we have here. No life jackets in a readily accessible location. That's a $300 fine. An expired vessel registration. That's another $500. No boating safety education certificate for the operator. That's another $100. And what's this? He said, pointing with his boot to a collection of empty beer cans on the floor. Operating a vessel while consuming alcohol? He administered a breathalyzer test to the driver. And, to no one's surprise, the man was well over the legal limit. The thugs, now facing a mountain of serious charges and the very real possibility of losing their very expensive boat, did what all bullies do when confronted with real power. They sang like canaries. It was Brenda. The driver blurted out, his voice a panicked squeak. The HOA lady. She paid us. She paid us $1,000 to just, scare the old man a little. To get him to stop fishing on the lake. It was her idea. Warden Miller just looked at them, a look of profound, weary disgust on his face. He got on his official radio and I listened, with a deep and satisfying sense of vindication. As he made the call, "Dispatch," he said, his voice now a cold official bark. "This is Miller, Unit 7. I've got 2 in custody for boating under the influence, reckless operation of a vessel, and about a dozen other safety violations. I'm bringing them into the main dock, and you're going to need to notify the county sheriff's department. I need them to meet me at the dock. We have 2 cooperating witnesses, and some very clear video evidence regarding a criminal conspiracy to commit assault and reckless endangerment, organized by a Ms. Brenda Johnson of the Kingfisher Estates Homeowners Association. The 2 thugs were arrested on the water. And when the enforcement boat docked at the public marina an hour later, the sheriff's deputies were waiting. And they went, with my video evidence in hand, directly to Brenda's multi-million-dollar house, and they arrested her, right in the middle of her afternoon garden party. For conspiracy to commit assault, the legal fallout was, for her, a catastrophe. The 2 thugs, of course, testified against her in exchange for a lighter sentence. The story of her insane criminal crusade against the quiet, retired game warden who actually owned the lake became a local legend. The HOA was thrown into a state of utter chaos, its president facing serious felony charges. The Kingfisher Estates HOA, under new, terrified, and deeply apologetic leadership, now treats my quiet, private lake with a level of profound, almost religious respect. The jet skis are gone. The speedboats now move at a crawl. And my new, permanent, and now universally respected nitrogen monoxide wake zone buoys are given a very wide berth. This whole brutal, ugly, and ultimately triumphant ordeal taught me a powerful lesson about the law. There is the law of the HOA, a flimsy, artificial thing written in a binder, designed to enforce the petty whims of petty tyrants. And then there is the real law, the law of the land and of the water, the laws that are designed to protect people, to protect property, and to protect the natural world. Brenda was so blinded by her own self-importance, so convinced of the power of her own made-up rules, that she and her hired goons broke a dozen real, serious state and federal laws in their attempt to enforce a fake one. She brought bullies to a warden's lake, and she was surprised when they, and she, ended up in a cage. Brenda is awaiting trial, and the community is now, for the first time, actually peaceful. But her husband, a man with very deep pockets and a lot of political connections, has just used his influence to get himself appointed to the state's Fish and Wildlife Commission. In his very first proposed regulatory change is a full and comprehensive review of all private lake and waterway classifications in our county, with the stated goal of ensuring equitable and fair public access for all citizens.